Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the sixth session of the High School Climate Change Symposium. Our speaker for this session is Dr. Renée Lertzman. Dr. Lertzman is a climate psychologist and author. She pursued a Master of Arts in Environmental Communication at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where she worked with renowned researchers in rhetoric, geography, anthropology, and psychology. She then went on to complete her PhD at the Cardiff University School of Social Sciences in the UK. Her PhD focused on people living in the Great Lakes region, leading to her premise of the myth of apathy. It also sparked the topic for her TED Talk in 2019 on why we need to focus first and foremost on attuning to the very real anxieties, ambivalence, and aspirations many of us are experiencing, the double binds that can leave many feeling stalled out and paralyzed, and what to do about it. Dr. Renée Lertzman would like to have questions at the end, but note that this session is going to be recorded. Dr. Lertzman, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us, and the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Hi, everyone. I can't see you, I don't think, but I'll sense you. So I want to start by inviting, some of you might have been already in a number of sessions, and I just want to start by inviting everyone to just take a moment and transition and allow yourselves to arrive into this session. So I'm a big fan of pausing and just sort of taking some nice breaths, deep breaths, and just letting yourself kind of settle in. And, if you want to close your eyes for a moment. But what helps me and what I recommend is, and this relates to what we're going to be talking about, is just allowing yourself to really just ground, kind of feel your body, maybe just, take a moment to just sense the weight of your body. If you're sitting in a chair, uncrossing your legs, and just take some breaths, because it's been a lot today. It's been a lot. So let's just take a moment. And I'd like to invite you to just check in with yourself. How are you feeling right now? How are you feeling? Just like kind of a pulse check inside, like I'm feeling, it could be a variety of things, but just notice how you're feeling right now. And if you want, go ahead and pop that into the chat. We've got strong, tired. How else? Angry, excited, proud. Okay. How else are you feeling? Optimistic. Pessimistic. Ready to make changes, subtle changes in my lifestyle. Great. Hopeful. So keep them coming. Just check in on how you're feeling, and chances are you might be feeling a variety of things right now. Antsy. Okay. So one of the things that I want to talk with you about is angry but proud, frustrated. See, this is actually really good. So I'm not saying that having all these feelings, some of these are difficult feelings, but one of the things I want to draw our attention to is that's great to hear about Eric's talk. I've known Eric for a long time. That was really cool to see him. Gosh, it's been like 20 years or something. I want to basically put front and center this premise that climate change as an issue, as an existential threat, as a reflection of what humans have done gotten wrong, as a domain of our lives is incredibly emotionally, psychologically, socially complex and charged. So that is the guiding premise of everything I do. And I draw in my work from research in primarily neuroscience, from trauma-informed psychology, from social psychology. Like, there's a lot that we know within that realm that can and should influence the way we approach climate change, especially as leaders and as people working to address climate change. And what I'm going to be going through with you, it's going to be it's kind of like a tour through some of the work I've done and some perspectives. What I want to put just right out in front, if you take one thing from this session, it's that these issues we're talking about are complex and charged in a variety of ways. And the most powerful thing that we can do as leaders, communicators, educators, and so forth is really be grounded in that and recognize that the human mind, does all kinds of things to protect itself and to protect ourselves from what feels really threatening, what feels really hard. And our job is to work with that. And there's some very specific ways we can. And some of you may already be aware of this, but the ability to name and talk about our feelings like we just did, it took 2 minutes, that actually does change our neurochemistry. It changes our way of relating with what's happening. And powerful climate leaders of the future are going to be practicing this capacity, this ability to be more open about, hey, let's acknowledge these are hard or challenging, or make you feel pessimistic, angry, optimistic, hopeful, sad, paralyzed, all of that. That's actually a big part of our ability to kind of help people, calm down enough to engage and be open. And so from that perspective, when I hear people talk about, people don't, are saying climate change isn't real. And, I see that through this lens of it's a psychological strategy that people use to protect themselves. And that also extends to how much people know about the issue, because there's a lot of talk about, people are ignorant or they don't know about climate science. Well, from the angle that I'm sharing with you, there's also a lot to be said for what's called willful ignorance, or people who just kind of don't want to know, right? And so again, it's really important that we continue to really look beneath the surface and really acknowledge that climate change is fundamentally a profoundly psychological issue. And so what I'm excited about and what my entire practice is about is supporting people who work on the front lines of climate change work, and how to bring this into what we do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of, as I mentioned, I'm going to kind of give you a walkthrough of how I came to this work, just a little bit of background. And then I'm going to show you some tools, some frameworks that I've developed. And I'm also going to show a video that was created specifically for high school students a number of years ago with the Alliance for Climate Education. So again, I'm approaching this as a conversation, so it's going to be kind of me just talking with you, and we'll have time for discussion and reflections, at various points. So I'm going to go ahead and share. Alrighty. So everyone, you can see that everything's good. Okay. All right. So I always start my sessions, no matter who I'm working with. So I work currently with senior leaders in big companies. I work with nonprofits. I work with young people. I work with all kinds of people. And I always like to invoke this quote from a professor I work with and know, Amy Edmondson. And I heard her say, it's hard to learn if you already know. And I really like this because it's really an invitation to practice a mindset of humility and to encourage ourselves to always kind of be open and challenge some of the assumptions we have. And I say this specifically because I think when it comes to a lot of the stuff around the psychology of climate change, and a lot of people, and we have assumptions we make, which go along the lines of, well, why don't people care more, and how do we get people to care, and how do we motivate people? And I am going to challenge that way of thinking. And so I want to invite us into a real compassionate, really kind, really like bringing that energy, that spirit of just so much compassion for ourselves and for each other as we work on these issues, and recognizing that we're all kind of like figuring it out, including, and I don't care who you are and what level you're at, we are all of us are emerging leaders and figuring it out. So just to back up a little bit, I want to just share a little bit about my story, which is that it really did come together for me when I was in high school and college. So that's now over 30 years. And this is where I grew up, which was in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this was, I was fortunate to live in an area that had access to nature. And so I really sought refuge in nature a lot. And I also was in therapy. I was already seeing a psychotherapist when I was in high school to help me with, some issues I was having with anxiety, with depression. And I really found the therapy so, so helpful. And so did I find my experiences in nature. So these things were kind of from early on very, very important for me. I was aware in high school about environmental threats, and I was aware of, back then, the focus was more on nuclear threat. And the nuclear threat has a lot in common with climate change because it sort of like, it brings into question, life on the planet and the future of life on the planet. So really big existential. And, nuclear threat, climate change are humans have contributed to this. So that creates its own kind of unique psychological situation, right? So anyway, so it started for me in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was a student. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and I was majoring in psychology. And so I was literally taking all these psychology classes, but then I happened to take an introduction to environmental studies where we learned about these issues and learned about climate change. And I realized like there was this huge gap. And this was in 1986. So just to give you some context. So really big gap. And so I was going literally, this is a bridge that cuts across the campus. So I was like going in between these worlds, and I decided I wanted to bring them together. And so I tried, and I was told by, all these different advisors and faculty, like, I'm sorry, you should just pick one thing. And, again, this is the late 80s. I know things have evolved a bit since then. And so I ended up leaving college at that point after a couple of years. And I went on this backpacking field study course where it was 12 or 15 of us, and we, were studying all this kind of environmental, sciences and literature and so forth. But what happened for me was like a lot came together in that experience. And what I realized was that being in a group of people, around my age, especially, and having the freedom, the ability to just talk about how we were feeling and what we were wrestling with really was profoundly therapeutic. And I came out of that experience after a couple months, and I was very clear, like, this is what I want to do, right? I want to help form a new field. I want to bring what we know from psychology in service of people working on planetary health. And that includes climate change. My work, as I'll mention, kind of, it really relates to any kind of ecological threat and degradation. Okay, so what happened, I'm going to fast forward big time here because many years passed and I worked in communications, I did research, as Ashley mentioned, I went and did a master's in Chapel Hill on environmental communication. I was always very interested in what can psychology tell us about what it means to confront living with and working on climate change and environmental issues. And so what ended up happening is I got a fellowship and I started my PhD in the UK, in Wales, of all places. And then I ended up getting a grant, a research fellowship by an organization in the Great Lakes. And it was basically a foundation that was just totally focused on, the protection and conservation and issues facing the Great Lakes region. And I ended up spending quite a bit of time and actually based in Grand Rapids, the Weggy Foundation. And I ended up living for quite some time in Wisconsin, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, right on the Fox River in Green Bay. And, it's part of the Great Lakes tributary, right? It's part of that whole system. And I really spent a lot of time, studying the issues facing the region, but particularly really contemplating our relationship with what's happening and with industry. And I spent a lot of time talking with people and doing interviews about how are they feeling about climate change, about the Great Lakes, about the water, about the air. And what I found in these interviews, in these, spending this time, is that it's very complicated. So I realized that I had to take a lot of my assumptions about why people are engaging or not, and I had to really challenge them. Because what I learned was that people, pretty much everyone I talked to, if you approach it from the angle of really listening, were sharing with me all kinds of concerns they had. And they also were sharing that they didn't feel, that there was anything that could be done about it. They didn't resonate with the activist organizations. Some people shared stories about being approached by, climate or environmental groups in a way that was, really was alienating, right? And so I realized that we're missing something. We're missing something here, which is that a lot of people care very deeply, but get kind of stuck and kind of tangled up. And so this concept of the myth of apathy came to be through my time talking with people in the Great Lakes region. And my premise was that basically a lot of people, all kinds of people, all kinds of political background and, identities are feeling stuff, but they don't necessarily know even like how to articulate it. And they might be surrounded by people in their life who are, not open to it. And then what happens is people can kind of shut down. And so I realized that, if we want to really have impact, we need to kind of change the way we think about engaging with people on these issues. So I did happen to listen to an earlier session. Was it Ramid from the Qatar? Ashley, was it?
It is, sorry, one second. His name is Nishad Shafi.
Nishad, sorry,
Yeah, you're
Nishad.
good.
So,
I don't know
so
if I pronounced it right.
I caught like just a little bit of it and it was brilliant. I was like so blown away by this person. Um, and I was noticing the discussion about, engaging with people, especially in that region of the world and kind of what are they dealing with. And it really reminded me, it's just like Green Bay. It's just like the Great Lakes. Like a lot of us have very complicated relationship with industry, which, on the one hand, it has provided tremendous benefit for some, right? And on the other hand, it also creates, just devastating impact. And no one really wants that. But a lot of people are kind of holding these things together. And so, again, the myth of apathy is the idea that it's not that people literally don't care about what's happening. It's that people often feel very conflicted and maybe overwhelmed and maybe feeling like a sense of hopelessness, powerlessness. And what I said at the beginning of the session is keep in mind that humans have ways of managing and protecting ourselves from feeling those things. And that a big part of that is, basically denying or putting it to one side or all of that. That's just like normal human, what are called defense mechanisms. So that's what the myth of apathy is really about. So I ended up going, when I was in the United Kingdom, living over there, I studied group psychology, because I really wanted to look at how people, like what happens when you're in groups and how we can use group psychology to help climate movement. And I met with a pioneer named Hannah Siegel, who was very old at that time in her 90s. And I kind of put this forward to her, like, hey, what's your perspective on climate crisis and what does psychology have to offer? And she basically said groups. She just kept saying groups over and over again. And it's taken me decades to really look at what does she mean by that? And what she means is that when people come together, especially in small groups, amazing things can happen and we can actually, process and sort of metabolize and make sense of what is going on. But it's very hard if you're on your own and you're just being kind of talked at, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute. So again, this idea is that psychologists have a very specific and important contribution to make. And, we psychologists really understand these mechanisms that a lot of people, shouldn't, like climate scientists are, good at what they do. And this is where, or policy or economics, and this is where there's this opportunity to bring these fields together in really powerful ways. So continuing on my kind of journey and what led me to create some of the tools I'm going to share with you, I was introduced to this approach in the public health sector that's called motivational interviewing. So that's these two guys, Will Miller and Steve Rolnick. He's British, the other's American, came up with this methodology called motivational interviewing, which is more about how do you talk with people, work with people around behavior change in health, context. So like really hard behaviors around, whether it's addiction or diet or diabetes and so forth. And so they have this very powerful methodology that they call motivational interviewing, which is premised on this idea of guiding. And the idea is that if you want to really help people change, we need to really think of ourselves as guides and less as, basically just pushing stuff on people. And this is the most evidence-based, researched, successful approach to behavior change out there. And why do we not know more about it in the climate space? I don't know, but that's kind of my mission, is to try to bring this in as much as I can, because it actually works. And the whole idea about guiding is it's a mindset as well as specific practices. And I'm going to show you this video in a minute that reflects this approach to having climate conversations. And the whole idea is that you're there as a guide. So you probably know more about the issue than a lot of people, and you probably have a very strong desire to get people to care and to do certain things. And so if you're a guide, you're thinking about, okay, well, how can I support and help this person or this group or this community or this organization? And that's a very distinct approach than, okay, I'm an expert or I'm here to tell you, what to do and I'm going to push you, right? Because that doesn't really work very well, but it might feel good to you. It might feel good to just be like, I want to get in front of you. And that might reduce your anxiety, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the outcome and the results that you might want. So I ended up writing about this in a book called Environmental Melancholia. And now I'm kind of getting into, okay, what did I do after I did all this research and I kind of came on this? I started developing tools and methods for all kinds of groups. So this is an experimental phase from about 2010 to 2020. So 10 years of just a lot of experimenting. So what I realized is that a lot of people in the movement tend to show up in one of these ways. We often feel like we have to be cheerleaders and we have to be really positive and keep things really upbeat and keep people inspired. We feel like we have to push on people kind of the moral and ethical imperative. So that's what's called in the motivational interview world, righting, RIGHT. This is why it's the right thing to do. We feel like we have to be educators and teach people, here's all the information. Or we are guides, which is, what's your experience? What's happening with you? How are you feeling? What do you already know? Are you open to hearing more? How can I support you? How can we partner? What can we do together? That's the kind of stance of a guide. And once I realized this, I saw a lot of what I call telling, yelling, and selling. So a lot of, pushing, talking, and all of that. And in actuality, a guide, kind of brings this together. A guide can kind of has all these elements, but offers it in a very particular way. So I started doing this kind of testing this out, and I created this. This was very early days where I trained people working in the energy sector who are out there talking about energy efficiency and our relationship with energy. I trained them in kind of an approach to having conversations using these methods in motivational interviewing. And I ended up doing this partnership with the Alliance for Climate Education, where I ran these high school, ACE is what it is called or was called, had fellows in high schools around the country. And so I would go and do these climate psych labs with high school students, and they really were like labs. And we all learned a lot, and we would try out these different practices. Then they wanted to see if they could scale this out and they could engage high school students to have conversations about climate change with people in their lives, particularly their parents and adults. And so we did a whole research project with Stanford where we designed a short video and sent it out to thousands of high school students, and then they practice having these conversations. So I'm going to show you this video. It's a few minutes long, and I just want you to notice, based on what I've just shared, what do you see happening here in this video that might reflect this method that comes out of this motivational interviewing kind of approach. This is the study that was written up about this project. Okay, I'm going to show this video. So let me know if you have any issues hearing it. Okay, cool. Oops. Uh-oh. Wait.
Talking about climate change can be tough.
Right.
I mean, it's not like something you can just casually bring up in conversation, but it's such a big, important topic. We can't just ignore it. And while you can't fix climate change all by yourself, You do have the power to affect the people in your life. So let's talk more about climate change. Here's how. First, think about all the things you want to say about climate change and don't say them. Really. You see, if you just start going off on how bad climate change is, people are probably going to shut down. They may feel attacked and put up their guard. It doesn't matter how eloquent your words are. If the other person's not listening, there's no point. So here's the secret to talking about climate change. Listen. Listen to the other person. I know it sounds weird, but it's the most important part. You may think the goal is to convince the other person of your perspective, but that's going about it all wrong. The goal is just to have an actual conversation, and that only happens when people listen. So, how do you start? First of all, don't ambush people. Get permission first. If they're busy, no need to force it. Just try again another time. Distractions make talking hard, so it's okay to ask to shut devices off. Once you have their attention, start with a question about climate change. Remember to make it about them, not you. Ask about their thoughts and their perspective. When they start speaking, you have one job: just listen. Resist any urge to respond right away. And whatever you do, don't interrupt. This might be the hardest part, especially if you have strong feelings or if the other person is saying something that you disagree with. But trust me on this. Just listen and be open to what they're saying. Now, if the other person doesn't say much, that doesn't mean you can go, okay, they're done, my turn. It's not your turn until you learn something about the other person. So encourage them to say more by asking follow-up questions. Ask about personal experiences. No need to go into science or politics. Reflect back what you hear them say. Repeating and referring to their words lets them know that you are listening, that you care about their point of view. This makes them feel valued and safe. When you earn their trust, they will be more willing to open up and listen to you. So after they've shared their perspective, then ask if you can tell them about yours. Okay, now it's your turn. What will you say? Remember, the point is not to convince the other person of anything. If you try to do that, they may become defensive and stop listening. Just share what you personally think about climate change. You may not be a climate expert, but you are the expert on yourself. So tell your story. When did you start caring about climate change? What worries you the most? After you're done talking, ask what they think. Bring it back to them. And you guessed it, listen. That's what a conversation is, a two-way exchange of ideas. Go back and forth for as long as it feels right. Learn from one another. At the end, thank them for talking and say what you learned from them. This is important. Ending on a positive note makes it more likely that this conversation will happen again. You see, one little chat may not change anyone's life, but it opens the door to more climate conversations in the future. And that's how you build trust. Get others caring about climate change and make a long-term impact. You may be surprised how much you learn in the process too. So, what are you waiting for? Talk to someone about climate change. It may be one of the most important things you do.
Okay, so that is available. We can share the link so you can watch it as many times as you'd like. There's quite a lot in that short video. I think the thing to really emphasize about that piece is that can be translated to a lot of different contexts. It's just not only about having one-on-one conversations. It's really about bringing in more active empathizing and listening and really recognizing that people's responses to these issues are likely very complicated. And it's really important to practice kind of honoring and recognizing where people might be feeling, stuck or dismissive or whatever. So again, I really want to invite us to think about reframing some of the assumptions we have, which is that a lot of people just feel scared. And when we're feeling scared, humans do all kinds of weird and unproductive things. And so our job is to really look at how do we help people kind of feel a little more kind of safer and more connected and more supported. All right, so there's there's a little bit more I want to go through. I can see already, I'm going to need to, I want to kind of tie this up, but I just wanted to share, acknowledge that the field itself, the kind of climate psychology field, is really obviously dramatically changing and has over the past year since I first started, and kind of was part of the, people that get it going. And so, I don't need to really emphasize this with you, but this was 1 week of headlines in 2020. And I just happened to grab a bunch of, articles, and it was just like, it was almost as if in 1 week or 1 month, all of a sudden everyone was talking about this. And there were a lot of wildfires going on. There was a lot of just extreme weather. And somehow this kind of connection of psychology and mental health and climate change, came together. And we've got all these books coming out. And since I put the slide together, there's even more books that have been coming out. So we've got, Britt Ray, Generation Dread, we've got Sarah Jaquette Ray with this field guide to climate anxiety, really good. Leslie Davenport has a new book out. All the Feelings Under the Sun is for younger people, I think more like 8 to 12. And she has a new book out about kind of teaching educators in climate change. So this is a very dynamic space right now. There was a piece that came out in the Lancet by some colleagues of mine, who Ashley Consulo and her team at New Labrador, and they talk about how the next 10 years are this crucial decade. But the really important thing that they emphasize here is that our feelings about what is happening are often what lead us to take action. And that, emotions, it's possible that these feelings of anxiety and grief, although difficult and uncomfortable, are the crucible through which we have to go through to harness this energy we need and the conviction we need. So this is a very important milestone, for this piece to get published in the Lancet, the most respected science journal. And to basically say that how we feel about it is, my interpretation is, these are our superpowers. Like, it's really important for us to really honor and kind of take care of ourselves and our feelings, and tune into the feelings of those who we're wanting to work with. So I mentioned groups and how important that is. And, this is really taking off big time. So there's climate cafes, there's, circles, there's cohorts, there's programs, there's initiatives. And what this is doing is it's really, building on the power of coming together in coalitions and groups. There are new organizations, Climate Psychology Alliance, Climate Psychiatry Alliance. And then I got a grant a few years ago to create something called Project Inside Out, where I was asked to kind of, pull some of this together and create some tools, which you can check out online, can share the link. And the whole premise of that is like, hey, this is an opportunity we have to become guides. And guiding is about relationship. We've got these various tools. And there's two I want to talk about before I close. One is this ability to practice self-reflection on kind of what kind of change maker am I, right? And this is without judgment, but really noticing like, do I tend to be that kind of cheerleader where I feel like I have to keep things really upbeat? Do I tend to just feel really angry and I want to shout and push at people? Or do I really tend to be more of that educator? And there's nothing wrong with these, right? Like, we need all of these ways of being, but the invitation is, how can we show up more as that guide, which is to say, I feel very strongly about what's happening. How can I share what I know in a way that's really helpful? And obviously, I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but in order to do this, we have to make sure that we're resourced ourselves. So it's very important that we take care of ourselves, that we, practice self-care, that we practice the ability to know when to step away, when to take a break and really connect with what you love and what gives you joy and fulfillment, and then come back. So that's a really important skill to continue to practice. And so I wanted to share that with you. And then I also wanted to share with you this very simple framework that you can start using right away, which is what I call the 3 A's. And the 3 A's are a way to practice tuning in and trying to pay attention to what anxiety might be underneath the surface for people, communities that you're working with. And, you could even reflect, journal about it, do it as a group activity, but reflect on what anxiety might be there. Ashley mentioned ambivalence. So ambivalence is actually a clinical term, and it's a normal and healthy response that each of us has to change. So oftentimes we feel ambivalent. Ambivalent means conflicted, or you have different feelings. So let's say you're going to go to college, okay, and you are going to move out of state. Part of you might feel super excited about it, and another part of you feels maybe scared or maybe sad, like you don't want to leave your family or your friends. That's ambivalence. That means that you can have these things at the same time. Now, does that mean you don't want to go to college? No. It means that you have normal and natural competing feelings. Now, when it comes to making changes in relation to climate change, food, transportation, consumption, how we use energy, all of that, a lot of people feel conflicted. And so that's normal. And instead of judging that, oh, well, you don't care. If you cared about what's happening, you do something about it. Well, instead, we pause and think about, well, where are you maybe feeling some conflict? And then you want to really focus on the aspiration, which is, really drawing out, well, what is the kind of, what would be, exciting or fulfilling for you, and really kind of bring that in. But a lot of people in the climate space jump just to the solution and we got to do this, and we don't pause to hold space for anxiety and for ambivalence. And when you do that, it's very, very powerful. It actually opens things up, and it makes things, makes people a lot more open. So when you're in a region and you're wanting to engage with the community, just like I was in Green Bay in Wisconsin, we want to talk about what's happening with the Great Lakes. We first really notice, like, I bet, what have you noticed? Changes in the Great Lakes over the years. Well, we've got invasive species and we've got this and that. And it's like, that's upsetting. At the same time, there's a desire for health, for restoration, reparation, but people can kind of get a little bit stuck. And so leaders, our job as climate leaders is to be able to say, okay, I see and hear where you're coming from. What about this? Can you imagine a scenario with this? What do you think about that? That's a kind of way of guiding people. And so if you go on the website, projectinsideout.net, which you can share in the chat, I have these guiding principles that you can practice and use. And the first one is how to attune to people, how to be compassionate truth tellers, communicate with empathy and compassion, bringing people together, like this kind of symposium is doing, giving people tools like the symposium and this organization is doing, and sustaining, which this organization is doing, because you all wouldn't be successful at getting people like Robin and me, and like, you wouldn't be successful if you weren't really good at sustaining momentum. And you're obviously doing a lot of things right. This is obviously a healthy community. And so it's worth looking at, why are you so successful? And I have a feeling it's probably a combination of factors, right? You've got guidance from your teacher. You've also got access to resources. Like, there's a combination of things that I suspect are this recipe for success. And a lot of groups can actually learn from what you're doing and, benefit from understanding how you've been so successful. So in a way, this whole organization, you're already showing up as guides. And so the invitation for us and for you is to kind of consider how to bring this even more into your practice as a climate leader and as someone working on these issues with once you leave high school, especially, you're going to be with all kinds of different groups and communities. And so seeing psychology as a resource for you, I think, is going to be really helpful and important. So I'm going to end on that note. And I hope that gives us enough time to have some questions and discussion.
Yeah, I guess I'll go through the questions that were in the chat while you're presenting. Start with the first one from Tim Mueck. What was it like trying to start a career as an interdisciplinary researcher and finding work afterwards?
It was very difficult, but I was totally committed. So all it takes is a couple of people who believe in what you're doing. I feel like this field, as I mentioned, this is like all kind of new in a way. It's very emerging, and there's so much opportunity for innovation and for being pioneers. And so I just want to really encourage pursuing that, and also looking for where you can get the kind of support and mentorship. Because if it wasn't for that early on, it wouldn't have happened for me. And the teacher of that field study was probably one of the most important people for me in my path, because it's like he saw it and he got it, and he was supporting that. And then I would just kind of, it took me about 10 years of experimenting to build up a practice. And even now, my practice is really hard sometimes to describe what it is. But I think that's the part of being an innovator in a new space.
Our next question, thank you. Our next question is, how do I replicate the experience of finding emotions like you did on your backpacking study in a world where it's not possible for everyone to do something like that?
So I think there are opportunities, and it doesn't have to be a 2-month backpacking trip. I think it's really important to find resources. It could be a local environmental group. It could be, any number of things where maybe it's a day, maybe it's a weekend, maybe it's an ongoing program. But I think that we don't have to do the, full on immersion to get a lot of benefit from the experience of being with a small group of people in a nature kind of setting. And this is happening more and more. So I would look in to see what's available in your community. And if you don't see something, then you can propose like, hey, I think it'd be really awesome if we had something like this. But that's a really good question. Thank you.
Our next question, we have quite a few coming up, but how should climate groups approach people in the most productive way?
I think that was the main theme of my talk.
Yeah, you did just say that. Yeah, that was from earlier. Do you have resources for climate psych labs that you use that you'd be willing to share to us?
A lot of it honestly made its way into Project Inside Out. So if you go on projectinsideout.net, there's some material there. There's the video. I will acknowledge that Project Inside Out was supported by a grant, and the grant ended. And so at the moment, like, we're looking for additional partners and resources. So it's available right now, but what I'd like to do is to be offering more like learning journeys and trainings and opportunities for people to really engage with this material. And if you're all connected with organizations that do support, especially emerging leaders, you can request that or suggest that they bring that material in.
Thank you. Someone asked about myth of apathy, but is that also located in Project Inside Out?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I mean, I'm writing a new book about it, but it won't be out for a while. I'm also really wanting to start doing more like sharing on social media. So I'm planning on doing a series about the myth of apathy, probably on Instagram, and just like really putting it out a lot more, and so it's more accessible. I have someone help wanting me to get on TikTok, so we'll see.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Our next question is, can you talk more about the process of guiding or motivational interviews? How do we do it? And do you think do you, okay, they're also asking about resources, but yeah.
So you can look up motivational interviewing and guiding. It's, again, I've tried to make that available on the Project Inside Out website. But a lot of it is freely available online. Like motivational interviewing is open source, so they don't mind if people use it in a whole variety of ways, which is why I started talking about guiding. And they're all really happy about that. So you can look into there's so many videos, so much out there. It just hasn't been translated as much to this climate world, and I would like to see more of that happening.
Yep. Our last question that they have is, how do we get this look at climate change from our non-science teachers?
Um, what do you think, Ashley?
For for me, it is a just difficult question to answer. I feel like I'm not like
What
I
would
want to
you,
inform myself more about what's
right?
going on in the processes of the world. So I'm trying to create an event where I can help others learn, but also learn for myself, and how different methods on changing my own lifestyle,
Mhm.
what's happening on in the world.
Right. I think, that speaks to the power of bringing resources to your teachers, right?
Mhm.
On your journey, say, this is what I've learned. Are you open to hearing more about this? I think this is important. Can we introduce this and bring this in? I think asking and sharing what you're learning with your teachers is important.
Yeah. But I agree. Like we only have at BCMSC we actually have a high school climate change. Well, we have a climate change class, and not a lot of the schools also offer that. So I don't know,
Yeah.
trying to
Again,
bring it up.
right. Again, I'm going to just suggest that when we observe, like, wait a minute, this isn't being addressed or covered, that is an example of people's defense mechanisms. It's like, it's hard stuff, and people get kind of um edgy around it, right? And so I just want to invite that reminder that this is really hard stuff for humans to have to confront. And it can it can just be hard, but it's happening. Like the train's going, right? It's like it is happening, but we're still in that period where, like you're saying, it's like only in the science class. Like that's kind of crazy, right? But how can we again show up as guides? And the way of the guide is a way of saying, hey, um, are you open to having this conversation? This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing. What do you think? As opposed to, what's wrong with you? We should be doing this, and you all are a bunch of idiots, which, isn't an emotional reaction, which makes sense. And you can share that with your friends. You can vent with your friends, like, oh my God, people are so stupid. But when we're out there trying to make change, it's really important to come at it from that space as best you can of like, all right, like, how do we make these changes? How do we approach this? What do you need? How can we support each other? That kind of thing.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Renée Lertzman. Um, yeah. that is going to be it for the day. We have, unfortunately, Dr. Robert Dubrow was not able to attend for the next session, due to his health. So, thank you for everyone for joining us on our high school climate change symposium, and we look forward to seeing the changes that's happening.
Thank you.
Bye.
I want everyone to take care of themselves and feel good about the time you spent on this today.
Thank you. Take care too.